United States printed about $14 trillion and distributed to Americans for free in just 3 years of COVID. I think that was the moment of realization that he joined the bandwagon of de-dollarization. The family institution completely destroyed in the West because of this endless printing, which caused the 2008 crisis. This time again, America starts printing dollars to come out of that crisis. But this time there is a big change. In 1973, petrodollar was born, where oil for security program. Everywhere it's a two-bucket theory. Because if you don't do that, then the entire financial systems will collapse.
This is The Global Gambit.
What is happening, everybody? This is a conversation with Dr Ankit Shah, seasoned author, speaker, and advisory board member at the GNLU Legal Incubation Council in India. He got his PhD in Impact E-commerce on offline trade at Gujarat National Law University. But it is some of Ankit's radical and provocative statements and predictions that some have been proven to be correct that we were covering in this conversation. We explored why Ankit thinks that the Western legal and economic system is going to be, quote unquote, wrapping up in the next few years, and that the US's leadership as the global economic power will be deteriorating, if not fizzling out, much sooner than we anticipate. I challenged Ankit on some of his proposals, and I was quite surprised by some of what he said. If you want to support the show, I welcome very much you to be a patron or to buy me a one-off coffee, as it really does help me to upscale and accelerate the output of content. But now, on to the conversation with Ankit.
One of the reasons we wanted to talk with each other, I think, was because you are very insistent, you're very confident that the dollar is going to be undermined and increasingly, if not completely, replaced as the reserve currency. So I was very keen to hear a little bit about why you think that is, but also how you think it's going to happen and what comes afterwards.
So thank you, first of all, for hosting me for the show. Always a pleasure when talking to representatives from the West, because we have different kind of angles coming in when you talk to different corners of the world. Because each country has a different way of looking at the map of the world. And that is how the inferences and the conclusions are also different. So I've been giving many of geopolitical predictions, big ones being Ukraine conflict, Balakot, the Doklam and LAC standoff conflict with China, exact weekend months, 370 and 35 removal special privileges from the state of Kashmir, exact weekend months, and many on the prices of gold and the Federal Reserve interest rates as well for the last 3 years. Accurate predictions. So in the Abrahamic economics model, the thought process is that you are the body and soul is just a vehicle, which is that you have only one life. Whereas the Sanatan economics model, which comes from Bharat, says that you are the soul and body is just a vehicle. So all the Western templates of economics comes from one life, as Bharatiya economic model talks about life cycles. Now, if you think that this is the only life that you got, you want to consume everything in this life itself. So Abrahamic models focus on the material factor of production, thinking that natural resources and material is what wealth is. Now, what happens with this hyper-consumption model is you steal from the pocket of the future generation by taking debts and consume it right now. Now, what happens with that is, since it came along with the British classroom format, with that single country reserve currency status, you deploy women as well as a unit of labor for shoring up temporary GDP, which is why you lose the birth rates as well. Now, you want to consume everything right now, pass on the debt to the future generation, but then you don't want to give birth, right? So what happens with this Abrahamic economics model is you have to now open up all your borders, which is exactly what is happening with the European Union and America.
Right.
Because if you don't do that, then the entire financial systems will collapse. So what is happening with the US dollar right now is US is right now de-dollarizing with coin, and BRICS plus nations are de-dollarizing with physical gold. And as soon as the BRICS will be ready with the new formula of currency, that is going to be a CBDC linked to some formula of gold, US will dump Bitcoin and adopt the new formula. This is what my projection is. Now,
No, but what time scale are we talking about?
I'm looking at the entire IT and the banking sector in the West wrapping up in the next 20 months.
What do you mean by wrapping up?
Wrapping up in the sense the mergers and acquisition wave will be so strong that the entire banking will be wrapped up into few entities and entire IT sector will be wrapped up into few entities.
So
this is my understanding.
A sort of a virtual collapse.
Something like that.
So
because that's the only way the Bretton Woods scheme is going to close, because you have 34 trillion plus of debts, which is continuously increasing. And the only method is now that you come back to what I call as the Sanatan economics model, which is gold is actually the currency. It is not the investment. It is the currency.
Okay. So let's break down a couple of details here, because it's quite these are obviously quite radical ideas, which I think a lot of people will be like, I'm not sure where he's getting those thoughts from. But so what about the fact, though, that BRICS has a few issues? You know, there are a lot of countries in BRICS that don't get along very well. Saudi Arabia and Iran join.
They don't have to.
Well, if it's an economic coalition, surely you need a little bit of unity. Otherwise, it's not going to operate very, very well, is it?
So let me explain. So pound and dollar as a single country reserve currency status, they remained in this status for the last 400 years by telling every nation that your neighbor is a rogue country. We are going to sanction them and you are going to get dollars and arms. So Europe is standing at Russian borders. Russia is standing at Chinese borders. China is standing at Indian borders. India is standing at Pakistan borders. Pakistan is standing at Afghanistan borders. Afghanistan standing at Iran borders. Iraq standing at Iran borders. So every nation was told that your neighbor is a rogue country. We are going to sanction them. And one bucket of nation will get dollars and arms. The other nation will get sanctions. This is how the single country reserve currency status continued. Created artificial.
The Brits and Americans weren't sanctioning.
Let me complete the thought.
Americans weren't sanctioning countries 400 years ago. They were barely a country in their own right.
And dollar. The 400 years journey.
Britain wasn't sanctioning countries 400 years ago.
They were not sanctioning, but I'm saying this is how the hotspots were created. Ukraine, Pakistan occupied Kashmir, Taiwan, and Israel and Iran. Okay?
Right.
North Korea, South Korea. This is how these hotspots were created just to maintain the single country reserve currency status. Okay. So now that US is aligned on this process of de-dollarization, as I've been saying since the last 2 years, in fact, 7 days before President Biden took oath, I gave the entire sequence. This is how it's going to be. Now that we are moving to a multi-currency world order, these hotspots are now no more required, which is why they have begun reversing. By the end of the Ukraine conflict, you will see a big chunk of Ukraine going back to Russia. Taiwan will also happen. Pakistan occupied Kashmir will also happen. And Iran-Israel conflict will also get closed through this decade. Because now single country reserve currency is no more required. So to my understanding, as I've been saying, that the IT sector was born with the fiat dollar of 1971, that the Vietnam War already bankrupted the American nation. They had no other option but to come out and say no more gold convertibility. So in 1971, when they came up with this fiat dollar, the IT sector was born. And with that, in 1973, petrodollar was born, where there was a deal with the Gulf, that oil for security program.
Yeah.
As I said, two bucket theory. Everywhere it's a two bucket theory. Now, in 1999, when Deng Xiaoping comes to US, he's being told that if you want this kind of technology, 50 cars coming out of a single factory, you have to first kill your own consumption. So Deng Xiaoping comes back to China and imposes a brutal single-child policy. Since then, it is the torture of the Chinese citizens that the rest of the world is enjoying freedoms, rights, weekend off, festival, art, dance, culture, and everything. Okay? Now, because single country reserve currency decides where the pollution will happen in the world because of its purchasing power, as 180 plus nations have destroyed the demand of their own currency and artificially taken the US dollar up. By the time there were two countries who said that we are working so hard, we are still not able to earn US dollar to trade. One was Iraq and second was Libya. both of them destroyed.
Right.
By the late 90s, the entire reserve currency bubble got accumulated in the IT sector in the West. But this time it was the allies, the European allies says that we are going to de-dollarize. They launched a currency called euro. As soon as they launched the currency, US got panicked and they tweaked the regulations in the banking sector. Now, commercial banking and investment banking both were mixed. Now, any American puts an amount in the US bank account, that amount gets swept to another account, and then speculative trade can be done.
Right.
This was the answer to the de-dollarization by Europe. So, as I said, the entire reserve currency bubble got accumulated in the IT sector. Euro was taken by NATO to the Yugoslavia war to bring the value of euro down, after which European allies realized that this is what happened to them. So they said, now no more, we are going to park our savings in the US Treasury. This is the first ever de-dollarization of the world.
Right.
Okay. In this, the entire bubble, which was accumulated in the IT sector, burst violently in what we call as the dot-com burst of 2002. Instead of Europe, this was now China saying that we will park our savings in the US Treasury, in exchange of which United States brought China into the World Trade Organization and gave all the membership benefits. And then China became the manufacturing giant that it became. But by the time it was 2008, the dollar had taken the role of the husband, the dollar had taken the role of the wife, the dollar had taken the role of the parents, the dollar had taken the role of the kids. Because of that low rate, interest rate loans, all the innovation was possible. And that massive, what I call as a 60% divorce rates is what Adam Smith generates. The family institution completely destroyed in the West because of this endless printing, which caused the 2008 crisis. This time again, America starts printing dollars to come out of that crisis. But this time there is a big change. The inflation that passes on to the rest of the world brought down many governments in the Gulf in what we call as the Arab Spring of 2000. This is the first time the Gulf countries realize that just to keep the US dollar going in the reserve currency status, they spent half of their crude oil wealth in radicalizing the Bharatiya subcontinent and West Asia. So now they need to de-dollarize and de-radicalize.
Right.
This is the exact moment when the Prime Minister in Bharat comes to power in 2014. So the entire process begins from 2004. De-dollarization, de-radicalization, decolonization, decommunism, and demissionarization. Because the entire missionary conversion into Christianity was also a part of the same British classroom format with pound as a single country reserve currency status. The entire profit of the
I'm going to jump in because I think you said a lot there, which some of it is interesting. Some of it, I don't see what it has to do with it. I mean, if we bring it back to the original point, though, which is BRICS and, feasibility of this, Argentina is a country that is defying, I think you would agree, your expectations in that they've decided to adopt the dollar. They've left BRICS and they've submitted an application to NATO.
That's
in the
wrong
past
information.
week, which is quite. A lot of people, I think, saw Javier Milei as a anti-establishment kind of person, but he's actually doing a lot of policies and moves that are quite sort of, in line with American and Western neoliberalism, right?
Right.
So why are we seeing that then? Is he just a stooge? Is he a puppet, or what do you think about Argentina as a case study?
So first of all, Argentina was never in BRICS. They had applied for becoming a member. So let me correct you there.
Well, I never said they were. I said that they were basically about to join, and then when Javier Milei took over as president, he pulled out.
Yeah, he pulled out because when this de-dollarization wave will happen, if the entire dollars get shipped back to US alone, that will be bloodshed on your streets in US, which is why he pulled out. So Argentina will serve as.
Could you clarify that? What do you mean by that? Bloodshed?
Yeah, because if all the countries de-dollarize on the spot, the inflation will be through the roof in US. Which is exactly why Argentina will have to serve as a dumping ground.
Right, I see.
Along with US. Yeah.
Okay. So what do you think then, what would you say if this doesn't happen? Because if within 20 months, or by 2026, this hasn't happened, the wrapping up of the IT and financial/banking sector, what would that do to your assessment of the internet economy? Would you revise your actions, or you would think it's going to happen maybe a little bit later than you thought?
Well, I don't think it will happen later because since US wants it, it has to happen.
So the US wants to wrap up its financial sector.
I mean, to my understanding, the powers to be do not sit in the White House.
Right.
That is my assessment.
So who do you think makes these decisions then, or who do you think would be the ones?
We call them globalist, or someone calls it deep state. There are different terms used for it.
Okay,
but
so
basically,
like they've been at the World Economic.
They've always been using nations like for profits. Right. As soon as United Kingdom, the interest expense crossed the defense spending, they jump to US. Now US has interest expense crossing the defense spending. They are now going to jump to Bharat. So they always been behaving like that. So nothing new about it.
So you mentioned a bit about your Sanatan model. Could you unpack that a little bit more about where you think that could emerge most quickly? So you think in Bharat and the sub-Indian continent and West Asia, is that where you see it emerging first? Or BRICS is where it emerges as part of this sort of economic restructuring?
So this particular model, since it is based on life cycle economics, right, and where we are seeing similar momentum of the primary steps across China as well. In the last 2 years, all the mandirs are being revived back. All the festivals are being revived back. They are also now focusing on the birth rates. They are also given the same kind of eat Chinese food. If you're touring, then tour in China, wear Chinese clothes. So it looks like they are also adopting something of a similar kind because they are also moving opposite to the exports model, because the rest of the world was told that only if you export to the West, that is the only way you will become rich, because that was how the single country reserve currency operates. Right. So since we are moving out of that model, what is going to eventually happen with this financial reset is only if you have something real to give to the other country, then only you will have something real to buy. Otherwise, you are not going to get anything.
So you're talking about transactionality. You're talking about transactional
international trade,
policy. Trade. Right, interesting. Okay, yeah, I agree with you there. I definitely think transactional politics is on the rise. We can see that with the way that the Indians are engaging with the Americans, or a lot of African countries are very transactional these days, I think. So what do you think that this means for values-based economics? Like we've got the G7, which always likes to think of itself as, very powerful, but it's often the liberal democracies, and, Canada's in there and Italy's in there, but they're not that important. China and India are not in there. Russia used to be in there. Where do you think that this takes the West then? As someone who's more educated in the West, I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on that.
To my understanding, if I am correctly assessing all the leaders of BRICS Plus and the Global South, which is 100 plus leaders who are now going to regularly visit Delhi, which is where all the decision making will happen, because we are actually replacing United Nations. We are not getting the position that we ought to deserve in the United Nations Security Council. Yeah, so it looks like that. The United Nations, since after Bretton Woods, all the bodies, be it World Bank or IMF, they were designed on principles which were to serve the hegemons who won the war. Based on their mood, the losers of the war would get some benefit. I think the fundamental framework of these international bodies cannot deliver multipolarity. So to me, it looks like there's a good chance of Bharat leading the path of bridging between the East and the West, which is why I see the fundamental shift of the financial reset will show that gold and silver pricing will go back to Asia from the West, which is why the currency format will also be designed by the BRICS Plus. None of the Western countries will get an entry in BRICS Plus until all the decision making gets over. And once that is done, the trade is going to be based on that new formula. Now, if West wants to have any kind of a real trade, West will have to manufacture at home, pollute its own country, use its own natural resources, and should have something real to offer, which means that you will have to cut the entire numbers of the Western assets and salaries by 60%. If you want made in USA or made in Canada product to be consumed by Americans, Europeans, or Canadians, the entire economy needs to be trimmed by 60% minimum. So where I am projecting is, I have already predicted US dollar to Indian rupee about 3 rupees by 2029.
So $3 is equal to 1 Indian rupee.
$1 equal to 3 Indian rupees.
Okay, right, other way around. Okay.
It is 83 right now.
Yes, no, I was about to say it's in the low 80s, right? So I remember reading an article in the Economic Times several months ago when India hosted the G20. And I remember Prime Minister Modi making it very clear that he doesn't think the UN, for example, you can't have a 20th century approach in the 21st century, I think is roughly what he was saying. But what was interesting is that he still felt, at least I got the impression that he still felt there's value in the UN. So you don't agree with that, or you see the BRICS Plus group replacing the United Nations?
Well, it is too early to say BRICS Plus will replace United Nations, but it definitely looks like the real producers of the world are going to call the shots. So be it G20, be it BRICS Plus, be it SCO, or even in the United Nations, because understand when 100 plus nations visit Delhi and they are going to lay out the agenda, there's nothing much what the United Nations P5 can do about it once the decisions are already taken by 100 plus nations. So whether or not or when United Nations reforms, it hardly matters. It almost looks like an irrelevant body as of now, because in none of the conflicts it had any role. In fact, even during COVID or any of the global crisis, it hasn't delivered anything. So it's always Bharat who's taking the lead on all the main responsibilities of the world, be it COVID vaccines, be it earthquake, or even there's only one country which stopped the Ukraine-Russia conflict and rescued people, and that is Bharat. It's only the phone call from Delhi which can stop any of the crises of the world. That's a fact.
But do you not think it's a bit unfair? As someone who's worked in the UN and knows it quite well, I think there's a difference between the whole UN system and just the Security Council. The UN Security Council is the aspect of the UN that needs the most reform. And the G4 countries like Brazil, Japan, Germany, and India, obviously, should be part of the Security Council, particularly India, I think, of any of them, as a permanent member. That goes without saying. But do you not think the UN as a whole, even if you got those reforms through, still has a role? Because when Afghanistan happened and America withdrew from Afghanistan, there were no countries, including India, I believe, that was willing to engage the Taliban. And the only thing that was left was really the United Nations. So do you not think it has a role somewhere? And the BRICS can be a alternative organization that focuses more on current trade, economics, or you think it has that capacity to expand into something completely new?
Well, to be very frank and honest, a lot of geopolitics has completely become subservient to geoeconomics. So geoeconomics calls all the shots. Now, as long as the role of United Nations is concerned, it will depend on how fast it reforms. If it would have that some kind of relevance, if it takes some speed. Otherwise, trade is what defines a lot of stuff. Now, one of the points that you mentioned, BRICS nations not getting along together. Right? Very important topic. I get this question often. Now, you've got to understand that these BRICS countries, they have gathered with the same reason that they don't want to agree on anything. Okay. They are rejecting the Western standardization, which is why they have gathered. So to say that because they have diverse opinions, it won't work, I think it would be a very wrong assessment. They have gathered because of that diversity. They don't want any one country to poke into anybody's business. They don't want anyone to give lectures on human rights and climate change. They don't want any country bullying around. They don't want any country coming up with a unipolar order. They don't want any country telling them not to join the group, when to exit, when to enter.
Yeah.
They don't want any country which is why they have gathered. So I won't be surprised after 2030, you will have completely different set of indexes coming around where Western universities will not even figure out anywhere in the top 100.
Interesting. Okay.
So, yeah, I think the
No,
passport ranking will completely flip. The university ranking will completely flip. And all the indexes, say, for example, per capita index. Now, it's such a hilarious index. This is devised only for the West, where they have one man and a cat and a one lady and a dog. It is for that.
Yeah.
We don't have that. Index has no ramification for Asian countries where we have a family unit economics where income is consolidated and per member expenditure is the minimum. It's such a hilarious index. If one person has the entire wealth of the country, still the per capita number of the country will be the same. It is so stupid. A second index, which is GDP, which is equally hilarious. So in the GDP index, you have consumption added with investment. One is a revenue item, another is a capital item. Now, an 11th class kid can tell you that if you want to measure final performance of a particular period, you cannot add a capital item with a revenue item. Yeah. But since West had that single country reserve currency endless printing machine, to them, capital and revenue has no difference at all, because you can simply print it and give it for 1%, 2% loans, which is how all this innovation happened, right? Otherwise, none of such innovation would have happened, right? So that index is also wrong.
I think there's a lot of very daft indexes. I 100% agree with you. Whenever you see an index for the happiest nation or the most peaceful or anything like this, how do you quantify happiness? It's a very subjective thing, and very significantly from culture and country and, the role of religion and something like that. So I very much agree with you on that. And I very much agree about the dominance of Western sort of assumptions that universities, always the top nationalities are for universities are from Western nations. And it's like, well, just because there's Chinese universities, Indian universities, lots of other universities are very respected, and they never even make it in the top 50, 100. Very biased. So 100% with you there. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see, how active and functional the BRICS can be. Because I agree with you. I think we're firmly in multipolarity. I think we've been seeing de-globalization since the United States dominance, hegemonic status has been waning. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see how this diversified balance of power. We had Macron go to China about a year ago. And I remember him speaking with President Xi Jinping, and, China almost welcoming the EU as trying to be a third pole amongst this two polar of China versus America sort of thing. And then obviously India is in there. But we've got to wrap up.
I'll tell you an important incident with China. So it was 2018 when Bharat first offered them yuan rupee trade. Xi Jinping at that point in time, because he was, I think, just incumbent in the Central Military Commission as the head. But after COVID, Xi Jinping realized that after working for the whole world for the last 40 years and exporting, he made only 3 trillion in profits after 40 years. And United States printed about $14 trillion and distributed to Americans for free in just 3 years of COVID. I think that was the moment of realization that he joined the bandwagon of de-dollarization.
Yeah.
Similarly, I mean, just as our Prime Minister visited last time Washington, just before that, you got the author of Dethrone King Dollar as the new advisor to Biden. So I think US is aligned on this process and is de-dollarizing with Bitcoin. Once the new formula will be out, US will dump Bitcoin and join the new formula.
Interesting. I'm not sure I agree with you on every single detail, but there's definitely some things we do agree on. And I do think that the role of CBDCs and a shift away from a US-dominated ecosystem is already here. 100% agree with you that so many countries are fed up with being told what to do, how to do it, when to do it. It must be values-based. And, one of the reasons I think a lot of Western countries have frustrations with India is because it is a democracy, but it's not a Western-style democracy. It's India, it's Bharat's in style of democracy. And for everyone who's been listening and watching, I know I'm not saying Bharat properly. Sorry, it's not, my first language. I'm learning, and I'm here as a Westerner to talk to Dr. Ankit Shah as part of this conversation so that we can have, interesting conversations, connect in this world where we're entering, which is not just West and West and West, it's multipolar and faceted. But with that, I want to say thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Ankit. It's been very interesting. Thanks a lot for watching, everyone. See you soon.